All right, good evening, guys. Ken at Tortoise Capital. This is the Foundation's Q&A check-in for June 29th, 2023. Trying out my new Sennheiser 660S headphones. Greg says, oh, an audiophile. Not really, but I was supported by one, and here's the story behind that. So I found out in my doctoral dissertation work that I am an auditory learner, and I never knew that. I always thought I was visual. It turns out that the auditory channel is my primary confidence building or information gathering system. So you got visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. There may be another one out there, but those are the three that are in this working model. And it turned out that there's only about 20% of the world is auditory or less. About 70% are visual. No, maybe it's like 50% are visual. 35% are kinesthetic, and maybe 10 or 15% auditory. Anyway, I always thought that I was visual because I'm very sketchy, draw on boards and all that stuff. But it turns out that auditory is my go-to mode when I'm really trying to gather information. Used to drive my dad nuts when he'd be trying to tell me something, and he was an impressive guy. He could be a little scary looking. And so I would turn away from him and close my eyes so that I could listen very carefully because I wanted to get exactly what he was saying. And he thought I was not paying attention, but that was me paying the most attention I could, was not to be overcome by the visual, magnitude of what he was, and I found out in Panama in combat that, we were in a night operation, and I had night vision goggles on, and I was commanding some guys in an assault on a compound. And the AC-130 gunship shot a bunch of white phosphorus rounds onto the ground very close to us. And the bursting white, brilliant light of that gets magnified by about 30 or 40 times by the night vision goggles, and it just overwhelmed my eyes, and I was blind for about 7 hours. But I was still able to command the guys in my company who were all over Panama City because I knew where they were in that mental model of the city, and I could listen to the radio, and I could give instructions, and I could command and control and be in charge. And I just had somebody drag me around the battlefield until about 7 hours later, my eyesight started coming back. That was kind of terrifying, but it was manageable. A couple days after that, we're in a building and we're doing some room clearing, and a hand grenade goes off on the other side of the door from me, and it blew out my eardrums. And I had this ringing sensation in my ears for almost 12 hours. I couldn't hear a thing, and I was absolutely terrified and was worthless as a soldier because I was lost. I could see everything, but I couldn't hear. I couldn't gather information. I couldn't talk on the radio. I had 600 guys in my company, and I couldn't talk to them because I couldn't hear them. And it was the most terrified moment of my life. I just felt completely worthless, and it just those next 12 hours were just absolute misery for me because I wondered, man, am I ever going to get my hearing back? When it finally came back, I was good to go. But I didn't understand until many years later that that was an indication of how my brain processed information, how it gathered information that was important, and how I processed it towards the most important decision. So I discovered I was an audio learner. Well, I mean, I've always loved music, and I always monkey around with microphones and headphones, and so I had a independently wealthy heart surgeon who was an audiophile, whose home audio system was worth about $500,000. Came and took some courses with me, and he really liked what we were doing. And I got a package in the mail from him, and it was a set of Sennheiser 880s. Now, that is the top of the line audiophile headphones. They run about $2,000. And he said, I want you to have these because I know that you will appreciate them, and I know that you would never consider spending that much money on headphones. And he was right. I would never, and I couldn't figure out how to give back a gift because you can't do that. You have to accept the gift. So I put them on and listened, and as soon as I put them on, I suddenly realized why people would spend that much money on headphones, because I was hearing things in my favorite music that I had never, ever heard before. So I've been cherishing those things for like 5 years and get replacement cables and all that stuff. And, you know, got electrical tape on them to protect the wires from, because the doggone replacement cables are a couple $100 just for the cables. And you can't get them anywhere else because they have proprietary input. Well, anyway, so I have some other Sennheisers at different price points, and the 660s are the next higher up. But I found some on eBay for about maybe $250. They were returned, so they were still like new, but they had to be sold as used. And for $250, those 660s give you everything that you could imagine, and the difference between them and you have to put them on and really pay attention to tell the difference, but they are astonishing. So I'm breaking in the new ones now and enjoying them. So I say all that simply to say that today's lesson brought to you by the letter B, Brian, had me off on this tangent. Where does learning come from? And we talked last week about this idea that in order to lock in learning, we have to come out of our shell and our area of competence and out into the zone of scouting, if I can call it that. We have to get out into the zone of scouting and then come back in, and we have to make an artifact. So we have to get out of our cage. We got to expand our horizons. We got to explore that space, and then we've got to render it into an artifact, a report of our journey, so that we can begin to think about it and process it and start filing it into our worldview. And then we got to tell somebody about it, and the artifact helps us do that, because one of the important ways of knowing is presentational knowledge, the knowledge that only comes from the effort of trying to tell somebody what it is that you know. Propositional knowledge is what's in your head. Experiential knowledge is what you learn by hammering a nail. That's the knowledge of your thumbs. Practical knowledge is what happens when you take many, many steps with it and you reduce it to sort of the unconscious competence. And that's different than practical knowledge where you're using conscious competence to guide your actions. But when you have enough repetitions and you have practical knowledge, that means it's there available on demand without thinking it's your go-to thing. But this fourth way of knowing, the presentational knowledge, only comes to you when you are actively trying to tell somebody else things about what you know. And the act of communication involves you using empathy to understand who they are and where they're coming from and what kind of communication they might understand. And that forces you to put your experience into different packages and try new ways of, you're exploring how to understand and describe the things that you've already internalized. And that fresh look, that different look, that multifaceted look at your own knowledge is the basis for presentational knowledge. That's why we say that if you really want to learn something, try to teach it. Because when you try to teach somebody else, trying to see it through the student's eyes gives you new insights. That's why the martial arts require it. That's why reflexive knowledge, as described by Donald Schoen, is so powerful, especially when you're talking about craft knowledge. So we might say, where does the learning come from? There's some implication. We could go forever. Is it inside me already, waiting to be remembered for the first time? Is it encoded? Is it, was I born with it as a birthright? Or is it out there and I got to go seek it? Is it completely contained out there, or is there some relationship between what I know and what I find and the intersection of those things? Like the two half pieces of the magical coin that creates that's the chosen one, the two pieces of the thing come together and all that. So where does the learning come from? And I would say, well, why are you looking for the knowledge? What's sort of the purpose of it? What is it that you're looking for? Do you even know? Can you describe it? If you start describing what it is you're looking for, are you precluding that it might look like something else and therefore you miss it? How will you know when you find it? Where are you looking? How are you looking? What are those methods of research and discovery? And that's what a visual person would say. All those are the visual. What am I Well, what if I'm an auditory person like me? Why am I listening for that new learning? What am I listening for? How will I know when I hear it? Where am I listening? How am I listening? If I'm a kinesthetic person, how am I feeling? Why am I trying to feel this new knowledge? Where am I placing my senses, organs to feel? Where am I going to find places to touch? How am I trying to touch? With a closed fist, with an open hand, with a filter, with gloves? Touching, smelling, emoting. I would argue there's some kind of that energy field sensations that we get, that animal instinct, that sixth sense, the spider sense. And then also the talking, the presentational knowledge, I think that is underestimated in a lot of the single loop learning ideas, that the talking about things ends up being part of the learning as well. That led me to think about this, that we say that writing is thinking. The creation of that artifact, and I would add drawing in here as well, and molding clay or shape, whatever. But writing is thinking, and that's how you know, is that you're trying to express exactly what it is you're thinking, feeling, seeing, putting it into words with some precision, with just the right word. And then as editors and teachers, we know that good writing comes from good rewriting. Right? So good writing is really good rewriting of that initial first worst splat on the page. So that says this is an iterative thing. You got to keep going back and re-engaging. That's why we need the artifact. And our reflections on the artifact become an artifact. So side notes and continuations and marginal notations are all part of that good rethinking, which leads to good thinking. And so if we think that this process of learning is iterative and requires an approach of continuous improvement and making haste slowly, that leads us to have a completely different feeling about how we go about gathering the essential information we need for things that are going to be with us for a long time, that are life-changing. I want to be quick, but don't hurry. And I'm going to learn to not throw anything away, just because I don't see the value of it right now. Just put things in their place as best you can, and remember, and be able to come back and get them. When the time is right, it'll whisper to you, that's what that's what that thing was. That's the puzzle piece. I didn't have any place to put that puzzle piece into my partially formed puzzle because none of the pieces I'd discovered so far had the right connectors for any of its connectors. So it must not even be part of this puzzle. No, it's just not part of this puzzle that I can see yet, but don't discard it, because you don't actually know what that final puzzle is going to look like, maybe. So I have all those things in mind, as I'm thinking about this process that we're going through, of learning and following the trails, exploring that space, talking about them, bringing them back in after we've assessed them, and then making a deliberate decision about when to bring them into the professional body of knowledge that leads to action, so that we can exploit some edges and do something with it in a professional way that is cost efficient, time efficient, elegant, no waste, production level, So when Brian asked me this question, hey, what if I have some time? Sure. Would I mind commenting on the following? So I broke down your email into components and was feeling my way through the phrases and looking and listening to the key words, because as an auditory guy, that's what I do. This is how I think about the things that you give me, and I have to I read it, I think about it, feel it, go back, start structuring it, adding some notations and lenses. And so these were the things that triggered me. With the realization or revelation over the last week, so that tells me already we're into an aha moment, some kind of abnormal insight. We've arrived at some destination or a turning point or a crossroads, or something more than just one more additive fact that many things came together into this little roundabout of reflection. And your realization and revelation over the last week is that your way forward, to use what I've been teaching you, is to go back. So to go forward, we need to go backwards. Of course, that's what life is. It's a spiral up the mountain. You can't ever do this without first doing something else. So you know that. So concentrating on the same two symbols, holding those constant, understanding them at a much deeper level, and using that deeper understanding of those two symbols to then help you focus on what they reveal about the patterns, yourself, your processes, the market. So by holding those two constant, that frees you to be able to shift attention elsewhere. But the depth of knowledge that you get about those symbols is also really important, because you're gaining a much deeper appreciation for their roots and the nuances of the individual symbols. So it's not just a matter of, well, I'm just going to look at those two things so I can study those other patterns. You're also understanding things, even if you don't know it yet, about the two symbols that are chosen. So choosing the symbols matters. And then the idea of getting the patterns right until they become second nature. That's that movement from experiential knowledge of the pattern, of doing it with conscious intent, to second nature, unconscious competence, which is what we mean by practical knowledge, where it is second nature, first step, habit, and then worry about finding the movers sometime in the future. And I would replace the word worry with some maybe less negative, connotative, emotion-free. I'm not going to worry about it, I'm already remembering that I got to do that, so it's on the list, so I'm not going to worry about it. I would only worry about it if it was possible for me to forget that was something I had to do. So if I've got a good to-do list and I get after everything that's on the to-do list in the right priority, once I put it on the to-do list, I stop worrying about it. Because I'm going to get it. Or I'm going to die before I get to it. But if I'm not dead and it moves to the top of the priority list, that thing's coming down. I'm going to get that done. So I don't worry about that. I only worry about it until, have I put it on my to-do list yet? Once it's there, I stop worrying. Because then things will happen. So think about what that word worry means. What's the source of that? If I was going to highlight that, I'd put that in red and say, what's the trigger that has that connotation? So we're going to find the movers, and we're going to get after that after we've done some other things. Now, that's a separate skill from concentrating on symbols to go deep on the symbols, concentrating on the patterns correctly, error-free, and then adding enough repetitions with grinding and smoothing until they become second nature and tested. Those are 3 different skills already. And then the 4th skill is then, okay, now how do I expand the aperture so that the things that I learned about those patterns for those 2 symbols, I can then export to a 3rd symbol and quickly apply them and demonstrate that I can now scale other symbols quickly. That's a 4th skill. Now, once I've done that and proved I could learn faster on that 3rd symbol because of the time I invested on the first 2, there should be some carryover between what I learned about the market and framing and self and process and managing those 2 symbols. I should be able to add a 3rd one and not pay a full 50% startup cost just to add a 3rd thing. I should be able to add that one much more easily. And then the 4th one, then the 5th one. Then when I have 5, if my span of control is 2, then what I have to do, then and only then, when I'm at that level of competence, where I actually have to choose to focus on fewer than my herd. If I can't manage 5 all at once, then I got to have some way to scan them, find them, trade them, and then shift if one of the other ones becomes better. So that's a separate process now of finding the movers. I may not have to do that. It may be that with the S&P or Brazil and diamonds, maybe that's all I need. Or like Woj with his 4 symbols. Maybe he doesn't need to find the movers. Maybe all he needs to do is trade his 4 symbols, and he's always looking at them, and he's trading them all simultaneously. He doesn't have to find the movers because he's trading them. Finding the movers says that I have a belief or I have evidence that I need to have more in my kit bag or more on my radar screen than I can manage simultaneously. So we'll get to that when that becomes the problem. That's a good problem to have. So we will handle that one when we get to that. And then when I feel I can increase my span of control, so now you're already making a mark on the wall for yourself to say, what are the criteria I'm going to use to say that I'm ready to increase my span of control by 1 more? And how am I going to do that? We have some ways to do that. Trying it with smaller position size until it becomes going beyond what you're trying to. I'm trying to add 1 more, so I'm going to try to add 2, and that's too hard. And then if I just add 1, that feels easy. And now I've raised it by 1 by overstretching and then coming back. So that's how I went from 10-minute charts to 5-minute charts to 3-minute charts to 1-minute charts, by always going much further than I had to and then coming back halfway, and then it became much easier. So we have some ways to trick ourselves with the recency bias and proximity bias. So to do all that stuff, what you have been doing is looking at the higher time frames, daily, 30-minute, 10-minute, looking for likely support and resistance areas. And I would just strike out the word likely. I would just say, we'll just define them as this is what we mean by support and resistance. We can look at it and say that is resistance, that is support, and that is not resistance and support. It's always a probability that the next time it gets there that it will be support, but we can have a precise definition of what exactly we mean by those things, and we do. We have things like the range stat. That is resistance until proven otherwise. You know, that's a line in the sand. The pointy peak or bottom of the RL10 when it reverses. When that breaks, that thing that might have been resistance is not resistance, and that leads immediately to the collapsing dragon, or the belly or the peak of the dragon, or the high and the low of yesterday, or the 10-day high and low, or the 30-day high and low, or the 150-day high and low. So I'm going to get rid of the word likely and say being very specific about support and resistance is a way to get confidence in the markup of what it is that you're seeing. Because we already know that it's only a probability, so it is resistance until it no longer is. So at that point it becomes binary. And we're as seen by those that trade those time frames. So now time frames, that automatically tells me that you've internalized the thinking about why we look at multiple time frames so we can see more than one demographic in action on a single chart, and why that gives us an edge. And you're looking at it as seen through the eyes of those other traders. So now you're not trying to project your beliefs into there. What you're really doing is you are looking to see evidence of decisions that the other traders made, which are incontrovertible. The price went there and then it went there. So we're actually documenting what it is that they did, and we are inferring support and resistance based on rules, and we're doing that with confidence. That is the footprint of a rabbit, and I'm hunting rabbits. That is not a tiger. So when I follow that footprint, I'm ready for rabbits. Not, oh, turned out that was a tiger. No, I know the difference. Now, I may still find a tiger, or the tiger may still find me, but we'll be clear about that. And it's not just support and resistance, but you're also noting market classification, the VIX, the gap stat, fail stat, gain stat, range stat. All of those things are going into understanding the terrain in which we are trading, understanding the ecosystem of the terrain that we are trading. Where are the peaks and valleys? Where are the holes? Where are the rivers? Where are the trails? Where are the traps? All of those things are you marking up where those things might go in the future, or just characteristics of the operating environment. You're marking up the playing field. It's like, as a golfer, those guys get out there and they walk the course and they're taking their measurements and they're building the strategies and they're building the distances from all the different markers and locations, so that if the ball lands here, then I know what it is I'm going to do. They're putting that into a very complex but integrated understanding of what the ball can do and where it can go and how that's going to affect if I want to play it aggressive, or if I'm trying to gain a stroke at some risk, or if I'm being conservative, how do I play this? And that's a deeper understanding of the topography, of the geometry of the playing surface. So I always walk the field during warm-ups to see where, if there's any danger areas or how the ground feels or what it is. Really looking for safety, but also a deeper understanding of how the ball might be bouncing. So your legitimate question at this point is, as you start adding all of those things and you start marking things up and knowing what might happen, how do I prevent that from becoming a market prediction and thus affecting your decision making? Because you're recognizing that if you predict, then you are putting a filter or a barrier or an obstacle in between you and immediate action. The trigger occurs, but before I can take it, what about the prediction I made that it would do the other thing? Is this enough information to override what I knew was going to happen? It's not. So now you're thinking in the middle of all that, and that's why predictions are bad if they are interfering with decision making. So if instead of predicting, what we are doing is pre-anticipating, we are pre-seeing, pre-visioning, rehearsing, and we start taking a look at what might happen, and we can identify what we're going to do when those criteria hit, then it's not predicting, it's anticipating and preparing, and that's going to be the difference. Where it becomes a prediction is when you have a bias that says, you know what, because I feel this way, I'm going to not follow the rules that I have already worked out, and I'm going to do something else because of that reason. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because that's where new ideas come from, but if you're trading that at a production level of risk, but without a production level of due diligence, then you are speculating, and you're not even speculating, you're gambling at that point with feelings, because you don't even know what the probabilities of your feeling being correct. Because if you knew the probabilities, you wouldn't have to predict. You could just establish that as a production level rule and you could execute. So when you feel the impulse to act, it's an effort by the monkey mind, the herd animal, the greed and fear inside us, to try to take this action without doing due diligence because of fear and greed. And that's never good in the long run. Sometimes it rewards us in the short run. You know why? Because most of the time when we did that in the era of evolutionary adaptation, it wasn't life and death consequences. Sometimes we got the big win. Even if we died, the tribe got the win, and so the tribe survived, and then the gene pool continued on. But you died. Yeah, but if you want to keep surviving, you can't be relying on impulses and instinct, because the market is tuned to smoke those out and kill you eventually. So we don't want to be predicting. We want to be anticipating and preparing and being professional. So put another way, how do I take advantage of that information? So now this is the part of the lesson where I talk about, well, what if this was 6 months in the future and you guys are sitting through this for the second time, and Chun Long comes in and says this and asks this to me? What are you doing in that room 6 months from now? Are you sitting there patiently, idling, waiting for me to say something that you can write down? Or are you going to try to answer that the way you would answer it if he asked you? Or are you going to try to answer that the way you think I'm going to answer it, and put that in writing, and then check what I actually say against what you think I'm going to say, and check that against what you would say if somebody asked you that question, and then listen carefully to what I say, and then compare what I say to what you think, what you thought I would say, and look for the differences in the agreements to see what comes out of that dialectic. That's why I say good thinking is good rethinking. That's why I say good writing is good rewriting, because that's about 3 or 4 different points of view on this same body of knowledge. So this is where I would say, all right, divide your paper into 3 sections. Write down how you would answer it. Write down how you think I'm going to answer it. Compare those two already, and what's different about how you would answer it with what you think I'm going to say. And why is that different? And it is probably different. But that would reveal something important about the relationship that you've created between me and you and the way we both think, and what that means. How you decide to value what you think versus what I think, or what we both think together. So that's what goes into that 3rd section. So now you've done that. And now we say, well, here's what I said. I'm going to give you guys a couple minutes to think about that. Brian and I already know the answer to this one. So we're sitting in the catbird seat. This is where we take a sip of water. And if you're listening to this on the video at home, just pause the tape. They said tape. What is tape even? How old are you? Tape. Pause the tape and then write down your answer. Now, having done that, this is what I said. I said, well, imagine you're studying a border collie herding sheep. So imagine a border collie herding sheep. What do you know about border collies? What do you know about sheep? Maybe the metaphor doesn't work at all. I don't know what a sheep is. I don't know what a border collie is. Poorly chosen metaphor, I guess. But Brian's from down under, pretty sure knows what a sheep is. What does a border collie herding sheep have to do with any of this stuff? Well, what's the border collie the best thing in the world at? Herding sheep. What's the hardest thing in the world to do except herding cats? Herding sheep. But they do it. Watch how he moves. Does the border collie predict where the sheep will go? Or is he just looking for indications and then adapting with a very clear vision of how the shape of the ground and the environment and the sheep's nature and the dog all, and the time of day, all go into affecting the sheep's decision making, which the border collie is an expert in, and they can do just enough to hint and suggest and probe and affect and iterate until the sheep does. It's just easier for the sheep to do what the collie wants, so that thing just stops. But so be a border collie. That's not even the conclusion. That's simply saying, well, how would a border collie trade? Once we're going to figure that out, and we can also say, yeah, but how would a cat trade? Well, a cat is a predator. A collie is a shepherd. Different mentality altogether. But watch a cat stalk. Maybe that's the way you want to trade. Watch a border collie finding the movers and moving the herd and managing that whole thing. A longer, slower process that gets a lot of protein into the pen that's going to feed us all winter. Maybe that's a better way to think about trading than trying to get one kill for the biggest animal I can safely bring down and then try to guard that against all the other. Maybe it's better to be a border collie on a farm with a guy with a gun and all that. Maybe that's, what's the metaphor that I want? Or maybe what's your power animal, and how does that shape the way you might then look back at this question? So there's some stuff to think about for the week ahead. So Brian says, oh, perfect analogy. My parents were sheep farmers. Bing, done in one. Brian says, I struggle to understand why people always stand in the wrong place at the wrong time when working with sheep. They're not thinking like a border collie. They're trying to think with their human brain. They should try to tap into the collie brain and be like a border collie. And then because they're in the wrong place at the wrong time and the sheep don't do what they are trying to beam into their head, they think the sheep are brainless animals because they won't do what we want them to. Whereas all the sheep is doing, they're doing what they have to do because of their sheep nature, which is ironclad into their DNA, which is what herd animals do in the marketplace, which is what most of the money is herd animal money. So you don't got to be smarter than the smartest guy. You got to be smarter than the dumb herd animal and care for the animals so that they thrive too. And so as Brian was reflecting on that border collie analogy, so now he's comparing what I said to what he thinks and what he knows and reflecting and coming to a conclusion that leads to action. That's how I know you've internalized what it is we're trying to do in the way we're teaching this thing. It comes down to a binary decision at every point, not this or that. It really comes down to, once I've entered it's a binary decision. Did I enter or not? And then at every price point or every decision point, did it hit my stop? Then I'm out. But if it didn't hit my stop, should I adjust my stop? Yes or no? And where and why? And the key is, in Brian's mind, that the subconscious mind needs to evaluate hundreds of hours of practical information working with sheep to get to that point. Or said another way, the subconscious mind needs to evaluate hundreds of trades of practical, forward-traded trade case studies that you did working with the sheep, working with the price, working with your inner monkey, to get to the point where you have achieved experiential knowledge and practical knowledge, and in this case, presentational knowledge, in order to get to where I have developed my professional body knowledge. All this work we're doing in here is in the scouting area and trying to decide what rules to bring in and what to add and in what proportion. That's the reason for doing this work and the trading journal. It is not a prediction, but it can highlight particular points of tentative conclusion about working rules at certain levels of risk that we're going to implement and then use the evidence of results to adjust. That's 100% different than predicting. If you go to Las Vegas and you spin the wheel, you're just betting the odds. I predict something's going to happen, But if you can learn, you can improve your odds, and that's what this is about, is learning to improve your odds and improve the rules with actual evidence that matters. So, imagine that at the start of the day, let me see where my little annotator is. So here's where it closed. And let's suppose that it doesn't gap at all. It has zero gap, and that means it's going to open right here. And we might say that the terrain for the sheep to run around in tomorrow is going to be what? What's the upper and lower limit? As soon as we know where the opening is, what's the terrain box that we're working with? And the answer is, somebody say range stat. Say the range stat. Range stat. So As soon as that market opens, and if the end of the box to the right is and that's the close, then I know that if it's a normal day, that's where we're playing. I know that. Do the sheep know that? The sheep do not know that. The sheep only, when they just run normally, and I don't try to spook them, I just know they're going to be inside this area. They don't even know that. They're just going to go where the mood and everything feels. And over time, statistically, 85% of the time, they don't violate those lines. I know that. The sheep doesn't know that. Now, if the gap is not zero, if that gap is more than one gap stat, now it is suddenly a large gap. Now the probability that that move goes beyond a range stat just went up. Because big gaps lead to big follow-throughs. It's only when it's a normal or smaller gap that it's a 85% containment. But if it goes up or down more than one gap, it's no longer 85% containment. It's something else. It's a more likely. So I need to be ready for that. That those sheep may be spooked, and they may just keep going with adrenaline. Now, they don't like to use the adrenaline. They'd rather not do that. They want to be very efficient. Just realized I was using the PowerPoint sketcher instead of my sketcher. Yeah. So, we're going to stay with this thing as if it was no gap, because that's the easiest one. Because most of the time, hey, 2/3 of the time, because of statistics, two-thirds of the time it stays in here. So that means that the upper limits and lower limits of a range stat, it's still 85%. Only 1/6 of the time does it gap higher or gap lower or gap more than that gap stat. So we need to know that the normal is that it's that the 85% rule of the range stat is pretty good. Well, watch what happens now as I start going through the day. If this price goes up and then peaks, and we'll call that the RL10, now suddenly the gap stat limit over here is no longer the case, right? Because when it was right here, that's the high of the day. When it opened, that was the high of the day. That means this was the size of the range stat. That's where the containment zone was. But if it already moved to here, and I drop the range stat to here, that range stat is here. Now suddenly, because it moved this direction, I now know that there's an 85% probability that it gets contained here, because that's a range stat move in that direction. If it now moves out into this region, the sheep just move farther than they normally do. Check or hold. And then when it gets to the high of the day, the containment zone is here. So it parallels here. So now this is all abnormal gains. That would be an abnormal move. So that's going to be a trigger, because I have a standard behavior or a standard rule. If it goes beyond rational exuberance into irrational exuberance, this is where panic can start happening. Because it went this far and now it reversed that far. That's a huge psychological shift, as opposed to, well, it just started here and went that way. No, there was a bunch of guys buying it, and now they're all wrong, and it went more than a range stat that way. They are suddenly now in a state of panic. Well, by the same token, when the price is here, this is still the upper limit of the range stat breakout, but now there's only that much room before what was normal conditions is going to become abnormal conditions. So there's like a pinching effect. This thing is going to fish or cut bait once it gets out of here. If it breaks through here, now it's gone. Oh, but no, it just started to reverse. So what happens is during the start, from the moment of the day, as price starts moving, you start getting this narrower and narrower range band, and then you're starting to get closer to the end of the day, and there's less time to move. Now suddenly there's more and more chance of a short, sharp break as they try and get postured for tomorrow. They might be fake them this way so they could run it up that way. So as you start coming out of the lunch period, even though there's not as much time, the possibility for a snap move in the afternoon session after lunch is there. And then I also know that in the last 30 minutes of the day, as they're getting rid of all their leverage, there's another sharp move. So while we are accustomed to big moves in here, I also know that there's two different reasons for big moves out here. And one of them is that the range stat boundaries got so narrow that there's a chance for a surprise move away from the VWAP or back to the VWAP, and then just the unwinding of leverage positions is going to make it really jump a lot in the last 30 minutes. Now, if I know that, I know something about the shape of the terrain that those dumb herd animals are going to run around in. All they know is that they are sheep, and that there's a little bunch, there's grass and everything for them to visit and cluster, and they start just, so they're going to wander over here, and then, oh, wolves come, oh, so they run this way, oh no, there's collie, so they're going to run this way, and when they're done, it's all kind of within the band of normal. Easy. But it breaks out, and everybody's surprised. We're not surprised, because we know where the boundaries are between normal and abnormal, and how those get adjusted during the day. Now, why would we go to all that trouble to learn that? Oh, it's because those hundreds of hours of practical information working with the sheep and documenting it and encoding that in our DNA and making that practical knowledge is that we are thinking like the little collie dog who knows something about sheep and how they behave, and he knows where all the little tricks and traps are and the boundaries, and the sheep don't, so he can do things to move the sheep where he wants. Whereas the human who's trying to use his little pea brain, so I'm smarter than sheep. No, you're not. You're just different. And you're certainly not smarter than a dog, especially a border collie. I mean, for crying out loud. The border collie lets you drive because he'd rather be thinking about sheep. He lets you drive. So anyway, how would a border collie trade? He'd know everything about that terrain and what the animals do under different circumstances and how his behaviors cause the sheep to move in different directions most of the time. But then he tries little bits and barks and nips. And if that is enough, that's enough. And maybe he has to do more because that's enough. And he gets them safely to the pen. If he agitates them too much, then they burn off fat, and that makes them less valuable. His job is to move them from here to there stress-free. That's what he does. A cat is over here to pick one out to kill. Do you think the cat cares about? No, he didn't care about the rest of the herd. He's going to go kill one thing and drag it home to eat. Different mentality altogether. Guess who all is out here besides sheep? Other sheep and wolves and dogs and hawks and badgers. So there's a rich ecosystem of people, and the dog knows which ones matter and don't. So all those things go into converting the information from our exploration into rules of behavior that allow us to plan and prepare before that market opens so that we can execute without thinking with risk protected rules, and then when it's over we can assess. We can assess along the way to see how things are doing so we can adapt and overcome intraday. We can chain decisions, add second positions, stop and reverse, decide to stock, because we have more than one pattern. And we understand how the time of day changes how we're going to behave. So that's some top shelf stuff right there. Your job is to just, remember, you don't got to be the smartest guy out there. You just got to not get eaten by tigers and lions and predators. If you're hunting, if you're a hunter, you better know who's hunting you. If you're a shepherd, you better take care of your flock and get them to safety and let them graze and harvest them as you go. That's a different kind of trading than one shot, one kill, and that kind of stuff. But so know what kind of trading model that you're using and use the appropriate psychology. Know who you are and how you work best and what are your strengths and weaknesses. And so in this world of integrating systems, self, and market, we're trying to optimize that sweet spot in there. And don't forget that when you're learning, you got to emerge from that. You got to venture out there. That's an act of bravery. But you're just out there trying to see what's there and expanding your horizons and exploring the space and then documenting it with an artifact so that once you leave your base camp in your area of expertise and you're out here investigating, you can come back and start seeing all of these different extensions. And maybe I want to go in this direction, or maybe I want to go in that direction. And maybe you're working with a tribe who are all taking a look at how's the best way to trade that piece. Well, I'm coming from this direction, and here's what I see. And I'm coming from this direction, and here's what I see. And we're all trying to add this to our repertoire. So let's pool our resources and use our true storytelling techniques and trust and accountability and the investment in each other and in truth telling and leveraging each other's strengths and protecting each other's weaknesses and learn how to get all of this into our collective body of knowledge. So yeah, what you said, Brian, going back to the two symbols, what that allows you to do is to go deep on those two symbols, because there are things that you learn about trading that you only learn by going to the depth and seeing what is affecting things at that foundational primitive level. You got to unpeel that stuff and learn that. And then once you come back up, you can say, oh, now that I can do that with two, it's now easy for me to add those other symbols, and what I learned from the depth is immediately applicable to those, so I don't have to reinvent that for those things. I can quickly incorporate and adopt it. And then I can trade those five. And then what's my span of control? 1, 2, 3. Now I can start saying, how do I monitor 5 simultaneously? So I got to monitor 5 so that I can choose 2. And when I'm actively trading 2, I still have to monitor 3. my span of control, if I'm limited to 2, then I can't monitor those other 3. Or I can get proficient at 2 and then increase my monitoring skills so I can still monitor 3. Then I can make a decision about how to drop this one and how to add that one. Or I can learn how to increase my span of control to 3, so now I only have to monitor 2. And maybe I can monitor 10 and then trade 4. Or maybe I can use 30-minute charts and monitor 30 and trade 30 or trade 10. Because the amount of time that I have in between, I mean, god dang, when I'm on a 30-minute chart and it's here, and the decision isn't going to be until it gets to, come on, draw the line, dummy. The decision to act doesn't even occur until it gets to here or to there. Man, that thing is like 4 hours away, unless it breaks through right now. And I can look at a chart with our techniques and in 3 seconds analyze. I can do 30 charts in a minute. And so, okay, 5 minutes. So that means on every 30-minute bar, a new bar is printed. In 5 minutes, I know what I have to do on all 30 symbols. And now I got 25 minutes to just wait and do something else, whatever I'm doing. Write a chapter, grade a paper, listen to a song, get a drink, whatever. As long as I've got my alerts in place and my stops in, I'm good. Scan for and decide for 5 minutes, make the adjustments, come back in 30 minutes. You know? Like, if the bar is gonna close in 30 minutes, I come back at 25 minutes, and that gives me 5 minutes to see what it's done. Anything that hit one of my alerts already triggered, so I didn't have to do anything. Is there some adjustment I need to make in the last 5 minutes based on where it's moved? I can make those adjustments, then the bar closes, and I'm done. Final adjustment, and then I got 25 or 30 minutes to go do something. So I can manage 30 symbols on 30-minute charts. On a 3-minute chart, I can actively trade on my best day 4. I'd rather just have 1 or 2. 1 or 2 movers on 3-minute chart, or managing 30 on 30-minute charts. You know where my attention is? On the 30-minute chart. Because each little trade is not as important as getting one big one right. So my law of averages says my above average trading is crushing it on the 30-minute chart because I get 30 opportunities. That's why that has my attention. Check or hold. All right. That's everything I want to say for today. I got to go back and get the dailies done and get ready for 8:30. This one will bear a lot of re-watching and rethinking. There was a lot of really good deep level stuff about what we're doing and why the iterative, continuous, lifelong learning approach is important. The market is the best teacher, and we're trying to learn and we're trying to adopt the optimized DNA of our power animal for trading, if you think of it that way. For me, it's the badger. Dude, I know where my lair is. I dare you to come into my lair and mess with my kids. I'm not going to challenge you to do it. I'm just saying, if you do that, you better know what you're getting into. And I've told you. And I'm just going to go get what's mine and take care of my family and do that. That's what I'm going to do. And pass that along. If you're a cat, if you're a collie, if you're an eagle, you're an owl, you're a tortoise, all of those different mindsets at various times influence how our brain works and processes. You can visualize those and use your creative instincts to sort that out. And that's for you to sort out. All right, that's everything I got. We shall see you guys shortly. Take good care. Keep the good cards and letters coming. You know, I would say, hey, yeah, Brian and Greg, you guys, the foundations guys, you got the sort of like the active coaching for a year. After a year, you know, just shift over to kind of like a Patreon. I think the $100 a month Patreon level of continuous coaching kind of takes care of the foundations and creativity coaching beyond those courses, because each course gives you lifetime access and a year of active coaching as part of buying the course. I just think after a year and it's still work and you still want the coaching, then do the 100 a month. If you just want the reports and don't need the coach, just hey, the $25 a month gets you the reports. That, I think, is the right way to do this. I'm trying to package that in a way that makes sense for this book that we're about to release to the world, where I hope to scale this for a lot of folks. So that's what I've sort of settled on. All right, that's everything I got, guys. We shall see you soon. Take good care.